True Paranormal Stories. Story 1. Grandpa. Before my grandpa passed away, he had always been telling us how, after he died, he would appear to us in white clothes and watch over us. He passed away from cancer when I was 8. The years passed and I was a very unhappy child. When I was 14, something happened and I almost died. As I was drifting away, my grandpa appeared to me, and he told me it wasn't my time. He begged me to wake up, and I did. After that, I began seeing things. Puffs of mist outside in front of my bedroom window. Shadows moving here and there. When I was 16, the first time I actually did see my grandfather, just floating in front of my window. I tried to talk to him a few times, to ask him if he could come inside. He responded that he couldn't, because my mom had asked him not to. We spoke about a few things on occasion. He mentioned the day I almost died, and how he had intervened to save my life. One time, my younger brother apparently saw him slip into my bedroom and got scared. That was the moment that my mom had asked my grandfather to please not come in the house anymore, that he was scaring the other children. I decided that I needed to tell my mom about all of this, so I took her out for dinner, and I told her everything. She was shocked and amazed, and she confirmed that she did in fact tell her father not to come in the house anymore. I'm glad that she believed me. Story 2. Catch a Cold. My dad grew up in a small village in Greece. One day on his walk home, it was storming quite heavily. He was standing under a tree in an attempt to wait out the storm. As he was waiting, he was approached by a slow old woman he had never seen before. She had an umbrella in one hand and a walking stick in the other. She asked him, "What are you doing?" And he replied, "Oh, I'm just going to wait out the storm so I can go home. I don't want to catch a cold." She looked at him and she said, "You have a long life ahead of you. I would risk catching a cold if I were you." And with that, she starts to slowly walk down the street, out of sight. My dad waits a few moments more, and then he takes her advice. He starts walking home. A few minutes pass, and he hears an explosion behind him. He turns around, and he sees that the tree that he had been waiting under had been hit by lightning and blew up. Frightened, he begins to run, hoping that he would bump into the old woman to thank her. But he never saw her again after that encounter. He's rather convinced that she was a paranormal being, since he never caught up with her, despite her being so slow, and he had never seen her in the village before or after that moment, and no one knew who he was referring to when he asked around about her. Story 3. Carousel. I worked at a theme park, and everyone always told me that the carousel was haunted, but I didn't really believe them. One night the maintenance door was open, after I'd emptied the ride of guests. My second insisted that they hadn't opened it. We closed the door, loaded the guest, and the door was open again. It has a turn latch that you put a padlock on, so it could only be opened intentionally. I went inside the door, to the center of the carousel. It's mostly just a breaker box and mechanical parts. I turned on the light inside and checked for the maintenance guy, but he wasn't there. It was empty. I'm just a little spooked at this point, so I say loudly, "I'm not dealing with this tonight. We got 1 hour left, so get your act together," in my best mom voice. I do my safety checks, start the ride. My phone rings. When I answer it, there's no one on the other end. A few minutes later, it all happens again. After I hang up, I call base to tell them that something's wrong with my phone. The supervisor calls back and says that sometimes the phone just rings randomly. Don't worry about it. Later, I recant this tale to my coworker, and she looks at me funny and says, "Did you turn the lights off before the music?" "No," I say. "I need the lights to get to the switch." She looks at me and says, "Oh, well, make sure you never do that. And if the phone rings after that, don't answer. Just leave it. I figured it must be some sort of electrical short that causes this, and I go home. The following day, I keep thinking that I see things moving out of the corner of my eye. Or I think I hear the carousel running after I know I've closed it for the night. I shake it off, thinking it's just where I've worked 15-hour days continuously for a while. The next time I open the carousel, I go to take a potty break, and I come back to a security guard standing next to my ride. He looks at me and says, "I saw him while you were gone. Just be careful." What are you talking about? I say. He's like, the ride op, the one who tries to grab operators. I don't know what he's talking about. I try to think of which one of my coworkers is that rude. And then he goes on to explain that one of the 3 park ghosts is attached to the carousel, and he's the only mean one. He tries to grab the ride operators and causes bad luck and ride malfunctions. Apparently, the other day, when I yelled at him, I made him mad, and he decided that he was going to haunt me every single time I worked the ride. Story 4. The Girl. We rented a large house. Each evening, my wife would take our daughter upstairs for a bath and put her to bed. I stayed downstairs, spending a couple hours on my laptop before going upstairs myself. For 3 years, this was our routine, and nothing unusual happened. Then, one November evening, when my wife and daughter had retired upstairs and I was on the laptop, the room went icy cold. I started to shiver. I had the sensation that someone was standing right behind me, staring straight at the back of my head. For several minutes I struggled to turn and look behind me, but I was paralyzed. It remained this way for a few minutes, and then the temperature just suddenly returned to normal, and I could move again. There was nothing behind me. I didn't mention this to my wife. I didn't tell her anything about my experience. This same event occurred for the next 3 evenings, and still I said nothing. On the 4th evening, after my wife had gone upstairs, instead of opening my laptop, I sat on the sofa watching TV, and from this position, I could view the entire living room. After a few moments, I became aware that there was a translucent figure of a young girl, maybe 7 years old, with long blonde hair, dressed in her night clothes. At first I thought it was my daughter, but my daughter has dark hair. The figure standing, looking into the room for several minutes, and then she turned, walked down the hall, and disappeared into the kitchen. The atmosphere was one of calm, and I got up and followed her to the kitchen, but she was gone. I decided to go to bed, but I still did not say anything to my wife. I didn't want to upset her. The next evening I was on the sofa, and once again the little girl appeared. She stood silently looking into the room, and then she turned, walked down the hall, and vanished. When I woke up the next morning, I decided that I had to tell my wife. I began by saying that I really needed to talk to her about something. Without any further prompting, she looked at me and she said, "Is this about the little girl?" I'm like, "What? You've seen her too?" My wife's like, "Yes, often." I told her she could stay as long as she didn't cause a nuisance. I said that I thought her appearance was going to increase for some reason. My wife, who is quite religious, said that she would say some prayers and tell the little girl that it would be okay for her to leave us. After this, we never saw the little girl again. About 6 months later, my contract for work finished and we had to move away. I called the landlord and he came over to settle up some paperwork. During our conversation, the landlord mentioned that we were his longest renters. Most people usually left after a few months. I joked with him that it must be because the house is haunted, and told him the story of what had happened with us. The landlord told us that he had originally designed and built the house himself, but their youngest daughter had climbed over the railings one night and fell to her death on the floor below. She was only 6 years old. The family was so distraught that they moved out and had rented the home rather than selling it. The landlord said that his wife wouldn't set foot in the house, and hadn't until she had died. I reminded my wife that it was in November when we first began to see the little girl, the same November that his wife had passed away. We now believe that maybe that little girl had came searching for her mother. I hope that she has found her mother on the other side. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the stories. If you did, hit that subscribe button and give me a thumbs up. I really do appreciate it. Bye.